Welcome to No More and Guess Less with Teresa. Welcome back, Schnookies. We are carrying on with our persuasion, but this time we want to look at the rational side of it. We are done with emotions, we're done with attitudes, we are done with consistency. Let's look at rationality, let's look at evidence, and let's look at argumentation. Woo! So, in terms of evidence, you know already that in order to persuade somebody, you want to bring up good evidence. And you have to do that in your assignments, attorneys have to do that in the courtroom, and police people have to actually collect good evidence. So, as I pointed out, evidence appeals to the rational side of a human being. I would like to take a quick detour into how human beings tick, because I believe that in the 21st century, rationality is out of the building and emotionality has taken over. It seems that older generations have a much more rational approach to decision making, and they really weigh up the pros and cons, the benefits and the costs of certain arguments or certain persuasive messages that are coming their way. Whereas the younger generation, I feel, is not very rational. They make decisions very much on their gut feel, very much on their feelings, very much on their hedonistic tendencies, as in avoiding pain and inviting pleasure. So I think we could all do well, and I'm still counting myself to one of the younger ones, we would all do well being a bit more rational as persuadees, because remember, the reason why we're doing this in the semester, the reason why we're talking about persuasion, is that you don't fall prey to these persuaders and advertisers. So be a little bit more rational, okay? Be logical in the way you're evaluating persuasive messages. Woo! And a good way to do that is for you to look at evidence, okay? What kind of evidence is given in the persuasive message? Advertisers love to give you evidence that's actually not very evidential. I just made that up. Please don't use that word. But yes, just have a look at the evidence and evaluate the quality of it. So, of course, we have the difference between direct and indirect evidence. You will probably know that from courtroom dramas, where we will either catch somebody red-handed, which is, of course, the direct evidence category, and then we have circumstantial evidence, okay? So instead of looking on while a crime happens and you're seeing the crime unfold as a direct witness, what you see is maybe somebody coming out of the house, running with blood on their hands. Something like that would be circumstantial evidence. Woo! But there are many, many different evidence types, and I'm sure some of them you've already heard of. We have primary, secondary, written and unwritten, real, personal, lay evidence and expert evidence, prearranged evidence versus casual evidence, and then, of course, dramatic versus rational evidence. The last category is exactly what I was talking about. I feel that people like to go for the pathos, for the dramatic evidence, much more than for the rational evidence. Woo! I would like to point you to the fact that they ask about the different types of evidence a lot in your assessments. So in a 2018 exam question was to identify 5 forms of evidence you would use in an anti-drinking campaign to persuade youth to stop drinking. Okay, so this is your scenario. You're talking to young people. Your audience is always very important for you to keep in mind. Let's have a look. On the primary evidence side, you could invite somebody who has liver damage thanks to excessive drinking. Of course, that would be primary evidence as well as lay evidence, as well as dramatic evidence, as well as unwritten evidence. On the secondary evidence side, you could also bring in somebody who's related to somebody who died of excessive drinking or alcoholism. That would be secondary. Woo! Written evidence would maybe be a study that you're handing out in the form of notes that shows the youth how bad drinking actually is, with a bit of research insight embedded in this particular study. Unwritten would be the testimonial. If, for example, the person who has the liver damage gives a speech, that would be unwritten evidence, or in other words, an oral testimony. Woo! Real evidence would maybe be something scientific, like a liver that is not looking so jiggy in a test tube or something like that. And personal evidence, once again, comes back to a person giving a testimony. Woo! Lay evidence versus expert evidence, I think that's pretty easy to understand. For our youth, we could bring in a medical doctor who could demystify some of the facts surrounding alcoholism, and the lay evidence would just be somebody who is not from the medical fraternity or sorority and tries to tell you what is going on. Woo! Prearranged and casual evidence don't really fit into this particular scenario, so don't think about them too much. I don't like them much anyway. And then lastly, we have our dramatic and rational evidence, which I've already pointed out. Woo! So now that you know the different types of evidence, please just also have a quick look at the 10 useful generalizations about evidence that Larson actually puts forward. And he, speaks general truth about evidence. For example, that evidence, of course, increases your chances to persuade somebody, especially if you are somebody who's not known to the audience. It definitely brings up your credibility rating. Larson also says that it doesn't matter if you are giving dramatic or rational evidence, but as I pointed out, I have the feeling that people react a little bit better to the emotional type of evidence. Some evidence is better than none, and please do not ever give evidence reluctantly because people won't believe you then. The way you're bringing forward your evidence, coming back to the drama behind it, can really improve the strength of your evidence. So if you're delivering it with a bit of gusto and a little bit of oomph, that can really help you. I always tell my students when they're writing their assignments, put something surprising into your introduction, something that tickles the reader's fancy. And that's exactly what they're saying here. New evidence, something that's startling, something that surprises, is definitely very effective. They also talk about the transmission medium of evidence. I don't quite believe Larson when he says here that it doesn't matter how evidence is given in terms of the medium. I do believe that a visual medium is much more persuasive than a non-visual medium. Oddly, the last generalization says that very dogmatic or stubborn, opinionated people are quite affected by evidence, especially if it's in line with what they're thinking already. By the way, this is another characteristic of ours. We like to hear evidence that is in line with what we believe, and we like to reject evidence that is not in line with what we believe. Just think about religion. There's this eternal dispute between creationists and evolutionists. The evolutionary school of thought obviously has a lot of evidence to showcase to religious people who believe that God has created the world, that this is indeed the case, evolution is indeed the case. But because people are religious and they do not want to question their beliefs, they will completely cancel out the evidence that has been brought forward. Woo! Now that you know how rational people can be, let's carry on by looking at reasoning. I hope you enjoyed it, Schnookies. Until next time, bye!